Hello everyone. We are officially live again for CEO Diaries. I see we are on both Facebook pages. We are also now in the group on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So we are everywhere that we are meant to be. So a massive welcome. As always, please do introduce yourself if you're tuning in now. Say hi, let me know where you're joining from. I'm, of course, your host, Lauren Dallas. I'm CEO of Future Females. And as you can see, I'm not alone. I am joined by Mark Berman. He is our Chief Product Officer and someone that, gosh, I've had a lot of history with, both within Future Females, being at the launch event, and then also with a whole bunch of other things. We were just, as we tuned in now, recounting when we started a podcast together. So I think we can leverage some of that experience as well. But for everyone who doesn't know what this session is all about, it is called the CEO Diaries, and our intention, aligned with our commitment at Future Females more broadly, is to talk through the reality of launching. And as you know, we are building and launching an all new tech platform. Well, Mark is the heavy hand building this tech platform. And so we are very close to opening the doors to our first members. So I thought, what better time to bring Mark in and just really get real about how hard it's been, some of the things that have made it easier, some of the tough decisions, and of course, just to be a sounding board for you guys, whether you're thinking about or in the process of launching your own business or tech system. So that is us. I see we have quite a few people tuned in now. I also know it's load shedding in South Africa. So for everyone from South Africa that's tuned in, thank you for the extra commitment to be here. And hopefully our light is going to hold us up through the session. Before we get into the detailed discussion, just to, as always, let you know that we do have a prize. And this is your choice of Future Females merchandise. And it is going to go to whoever interacts or shares their own story or supports another member who's asking a question most in the comments. So we do this just because it's way more fun if it's not just me and Mark talking, which at the moment we're doing for many hours a week, and rather are here to be able to answer for you. So I can see we have a bunch of people tuned in. Please say hi on your respective channel. We are across 4 now. And Mark, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Lauren. Great to be here. Hey, everyone.
Yay. So, I mean, Mark, I can't do your intro justice because you have had such a long and diverse career in tech and also in startups. So maybe you want to just start there and give people a little bit of your background.
Sure. Like you said, I've been doing the startup thing probably for, the last 10 odd years. Founded a couple of startups, had one small exit, mentored probably 20 plus startups on product strategy and all things related to building a product, commercializing a product, and so on. Done a lot of VC work in terms of M&A type due diligence, and did a stint at Techstars, which obviously is where we met. And had it not been for the universe bringing us together, we wouldn't be here talking about Future Females. So thanks, universe.
Thank you, universe.
And then in a past life, led product management for a large cloud platform, working on a number of big services that are used pretty extensively. But that literally feels like a lifetime ago.
If you're like me, it feels like this year has been about 10 years in one alone. And I guess that's the reality of the stress around launch. But I can see a few people who have said hi. So we've got Charlene tuning in from Bryanston, right next to me. We've got Jocelyn from Denver, Colorado, so a lot closer to you. So welcome. Please do ask any questions as we go through. And someone else from South Africa whose lights are on. Mine are no longer on. So we're going to enjoy this session come what may. Great. So The purpose, of course, of this is to get deep into really what was the process that you don't necessarily pick up from the marketing materials related to the launch. So for anyone who doesn't know what we're launching, it is a community-led learning platform for female entrepreneurs. We have been working on building courses with leading founders on all different topics, founders who have actually achieved success from their strategies multiple times over. And then we've been working on the tech that essentially houses those courses, but also makes it fun to go through them and take action together as a community. So, Mark, I think if we take it back to December, and we've been having conversations for a lot longer, but I'd say December is when the strategy changed and we really made that commitment to building this. So, from the product perspective, do you want to walk through some of the first things that we did?
Sure. I think, just thinking about at least how I like to think about it is for any startup, building a business plan is an important step in trying to get one's ideas down on paper. And the standard chapters that go into a business plan include the basics, like who's your customer, what are some of the pain points that your customer has? Who are some of your competitors? What are the different features that your competitors have? What are the differentiators? Pricing, things like that. So, one of the first things, that we did was to effectively start tackling those key chapters. And a big part of that was doing customer research. So December, we spent some time building a survey to try and get our thoughts down in writing in terms of what we think the community might want in terms of our users, and also what we think the priorities in terms of those needs might be. And then, thankfully, there's a huge following behind Future Females, so we were able to tap into that community and get close to 1,000 responses. That is statistically significant, and most startups would probably dream to have that kind of data. But it was the beginning of the next step in the evolution of figuring out the product strategy.
And I think I remember one of the things we were debating back then, having this existing database was obviously a massive plus, but current database was still the exact right target audience for the new platform, if you remember. And therefore, and maybe I'm bringing this up because perhaps some people tuned in are in the same situation. They're like, I've got an audience, but I don't feel like the audience is buying from me, if I can even put it like that. I can't remember what we did exactly, though. Did we take it more broadly, or we just took it first and then kind of aligned it to our personas?
Yeah, so I think that was it was the persona discussion that I think we used to try to tease out how we might slice the data. So I think it's a great point that we should all be asking ourselves, especially as we build and launch, and even the version 1s and version 2s and version 3s, often what we see is that the customers that you start out with may not be the customers that are the ideal, or that are the same customers maybe in a version 3. So I think trying to, be able to have the right filters, is it demographics, is it personas, is it buying behavior, is it who knows what? But I think that was also, a big part of what we try to tease out, back then, defining, the 3 personas nice and clearly, and then using that as a way to kind of see if there's any differences between these different personas.
Yeah, I do remember that. I'm just wondering for the people tuned in, because we have quite a good audience at this point. Do you want to let us know what you're building? If you are in the process of building and launching, please let us know kind of your niche. And then if you're not, perhaps you want to just write pre-launch and share your idea if you do have it. But it would be really, helpful for our conversation, but also just really interesting. We always love to know what you're working on. So Mark, I remember something that we fed into the survey was actually our brainstorm of all of the features that we wanted in this new platform. And we ended up we literally just firstly, we did a lot of competitor research. And secondly, we ended up just brainstorming this massive list. And one of the things that was interesting for me is that some of the features that I thought were going to come out as like the most valuable really didn't. And some of the ones that weren't, that I didn't thought, came out on top. Do you want to just kind of speak through how that list building and what we did with those insights?
Yeah, sure. I think, competitive research is a great example because I've worked with many startups who haven't done competitive research. And often the argument is, well, there's no competitors that have an equivalent offering. That's why we're building whatever we're building, or, the features are kind of spread across multiple competitors and so on. And I think, that's great. But the reality is that there's usually a problem has already been solved, and it may not be the most elegant solution, even manual, like piece of paper doing something, manually, is still a solution. It may not be the most efficient. So I think doing competitive analysis is an important step in just kind of, getting the reality check of what's out there, and so on. But one of the things that I find especially useful in looking at competitors is how they talk about features, because most of the time, there's been many iterations coming up with the right phrasing of certain features. And rather than try to reinvent the wheel, it's a helpful way to kind of, build the list using feature terminology, that competitors have already defined, and then, highlighting what is common across these different competitors, which I guess we consider table stakes. You have to have them to be able to just compete. And then what's considered a differentiator. And also as part of that, it's helpful to kind of look at pricing, because when you start to look at differentiation, it then starts to become clearer why certain offerings might be more expensive or cheaper than other offerings. So that for us, I think, was a very important step in just kind of getting on the same page, especially, working with a group of people. So it was the leadership team from Future Females, who all have different, technical understanding and market understanding and whatnot. So it's a great way to level set, and then, use that as a way to kind of flesh out, more detail. So one of the great example was, I think, being able to have like direct messaging between end users. Originally, I think we thought, this would be a number one feature. But one of the exercises that we did was a forced prioritization exercise. So this is, just a strategy that we use to, effectively drive what are the top, is it 5 or 10, versus bottom 5 or 10. And it's a great way, especially if you've got a long list of features, to kind of, get the top and the bottom, and then use that as a way to kind of, dig deeper. And there's a great example where being able to have, direct messaging was bottom of the list, which I think we were quite surprised about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what we realized is, before you have small groups where people can share in a group setting, why would you direct message someone that you just don't know from a bar of soap, right? So exactly right. Yeah, some really interesting insights came out from it. So you were talking about us as a leadership team working on the first iteration of the product. And I can also see some people tuned in sharing what they're launching. So to quickly jump over there, someone on LinkedIn is doing a sports management platform. Amazing. Ekaterina launching a school. Kerry, a course to help women create their own happy and healthy lifestyles. Very, very needed. And someone agreeing on paper systems. It absolutely still is a solution. So, I mean, guys, you're probably going through your own version of the process that we're speaking through now. I want to jump right into one of our biggest challenges in the early stages. So I remember we all jumped on a plane, Cordula from Europe, myself and Serena from different parts across Africa, and joined you in Seattle. And we had a couple of weeks of like really intensive prototyping work, like literally going, this is the customer insight, this is our competitive feedback, let's like sketch the ideal platform now. And it was such an amazing exercise, and we made a lot of headway as a team, but we also made a lot of headway because we had our designer on board already at that point. So every day he was designing overnight and we were reviewing. And then unfortunately he had to leave the organization for personal reasons, no hard feelings, but I remember that being quite a hit to our momentum. And obviously something that happens often, whether it's a designer or a developer or a team member. So maybe you want to just speak through how you manage that.
Yeah, I think, also just from experience, what I found is that maybe it's just the startups I've worked with, but it seems as though the trend, 8 or 9 out of 10 are very much in the got an idea, let's start building. But what usually tends to happen is that you're a year into it, you've now built something, maybe now you start releasing to early customers, and then you find out there's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't work the way customers want it to work, or aren't really solving the problems you want them to solve, and so on. So what I've found works really, really well, and an exercise that I've done many times with startups that I've worked in a fractional kind of head of product role, is to start with UX strategy as early as possible. And what I mean by UX strategy, I'm talking boxes and lines, not pretty stuff. It doesn't have all the colors and all the formatting and whatnot, but it's intended to capture the conceptual intent. And that turns out to be an amazingly powerful tool, because if you can remove technology from the discussion, and not have to worry about HTML and CSS and JavaScript and all of the other details that go into building something real, and rather just focus on boxes and lines and user flow, what would I click on and what does that behavior do, and so on. It turns out you can have a very quick and productive conversation about key concepts that helps multiple people, especially when there's different technical understanding, helps multiple people get on the same page pretty quickly. So, part of as you mentioned, part of the work that we did up front was to have a very strong UX person who I've worked with in the past. I actually consulted to his company a couple of years back to help them with their product strategy. Realized he's a really strong UX person, and then forged this relationship over the last couple of years. So we did all of this pre-work, myself and this person, to kind of flesh out some of the details, which then and a lot of that was informed by competitors, and then that was input that we used when we got together for the 2 weeks, where we had the structured kind of set of modules that we were gonna work through. And we're obviously building things like events and courses and whatnot. So it's breaking those modules down into the respective pieces and then talking through, well, what does a course look like? Are there lessons, and are lessons broken down into difficulty level and things like that? And even just having some of those basic concepts written down, and then talking about, well, do we show an accordion for each difficulty level, expand and collapse, so that we can show the different lessons within there. Even that is the next step in just kind of visualizing the concept, and helping to get something down on paper in a very quick iterative process.
I think definitely one of the things that struck me through this process, I mean, even in the early design, but even then, iterations past that as we've been developing, is the number of micro decisions that need to be made. Like you were saying, down to like the video player on lessons. It has been, for me, and I do also have a tech startup background, it's been a little bit overwhelming. So obviously there's people tuned in who are launching. So I have maybe an interesting question that I've never asked you before. What would be your advice to a startup founder who is non-techie in terms of launching a tech platform? Would you advise them to build or to look for something that's more out of the box and malleable?
Well, I think, one of the things that we did, if you recall, was while we were kind of fleshing out the features and doing the competitive analysis, is I spent quite a bit of time looking at out of the box offerings out there. And a great one was on some of the like discussion forum software, which we then, reviewed together. So I feel like there's a great example where if you're a non-technical founder, my suggestion would be find yourself a technical founder as a partner, because I feel the sooner you can start having the technical discussion, the better. And it's not necessarily about the nuts and bolts. It's more about the basic feature set. So one of the things that we went through when we were evaluating the different, and there's a gazillion different discussion forums out there, from free to very expensive and a whole bunch in the middle, was trying to work through what we think the most minimum feature set is that we want to be able to launch with in terms of an MVP. So I think having the UX boxes and lines work happening in parallel, where we could actually just mock up in a couple of hours what we think a basic user experience would be: asking a question, providing a reply. Do we have multiple levels of replies or just a single level of reply? Can I favorite? Can I flag someone's reply as inappropriate, and so on?
You're taking me back, Mark. Like
Hopefully
I remember.
hopefully good flashbacks, not bad flashbacks. So there was, I think, a great example where, once we had the basic features kind of sort of defined in terms of what we desired from a, version 1 perspective, was then trying to weigh up the pros and cons of how much do some of these solutions cost, and how flexible are they to be able to customizing the domain name so that it looks integrated, customizing the login so that people don't have multiple logins. Those seem like basic things, but it turns out not all platforms provide as elegant an integration as one might like. So it was trying to figure out that matrix of, these are the things that we want, which of these platforms offer that, and then how much work is it to try to solve some of these questions. And so there, I think, is a great example where what a technical founder should be doing is figuring out that basic feature matrix, doing this kind of due diligence in evaluating different options that are out there, and trying to figure out a cost of how much it would take, buy versus build, and nothing that is bought comes for free in terms of customization. You still have to customize. So there's always the customization fee on top of it. So one of the things that I think, it's a long-winded story, but I think one of the things that I've experienced with startups is that very few actually go through this process. It's usually a, build or buy, but it's not necessarily a trade-off of one versus the other. And a big part of it is, your own technical stack understanding and competency, and plus the developer team that you're going to be working with. So I think there's a great example that if you don't have a technical founder on board, then you're basically putting, all of that responsibility on someone else who you may have never worked with before, don't really know the lingo, and so on. And that, I think, adds the exponential risk to meeting any deadline or achieving, a solution within any kind of budget and so on. So I think for us, that was definitely maybe one of the wins, is, coming from a technical background and having a good tech stack understanding, I kind of, shortlisted what I think we should be building on. And then it was a matter of finding the right people, and then doing prototypes. So the team that we ultimately landed with, because we had never worked together, and even though I did technical interviews with the guys where, they were each given a coding problem to solve, that kind of gave you a good understanding of their skills. These guys had never worked with some of these cloud platforms before. So the question is, how do you now get everyone on the same page? And one of the ways that I like to work is doing prototypes. So we literally time boxed 2 days. to go through a thought experiment of what would it take to build our own discussion offering. And I had broken down the core pieces of this. There's, references on how others have done something similar. It didn't look very complicated. And a lot of the cloud platforms, including the one that I had worked on, have become very sophisticated in terms of the service offerings that the toolbox has now become pretty amazing. So, we spent a couple of days proving whether or not the technology can solve the problem and how much cost it would incur. It turns out it was probably quicker for us to do this than go with an out of the box solution, which then would require customization and maybe some, weird workarounds to kind of solve, some of the challenges. So, yeah.
I think, I mean, that is a very thorough answer, which is why you're so good at your job. But and maybe I just want to add on to it. So firstly, I'm quite clearly sitting in the dark here. I didn't want to interrupt our streaming to swap to my inverter, so we will just carry on. And to everyone else sitting in the dark, tuned in, thank you. Please do ask any questions that you have. We normally run this for around 30 minutes, but there's so much more we could share. So please add any questions, whatever channel you're on, into the chat, and I'll throw them at Mark. I think, everything that you've been saying, Mark, is obviously the strategic decisions that we made. But I think something that happened before this that is relevant to bring up for, and I recognize some of the names here, even from our Founders Club, we actually MVP'd this model of platform through our Founders Club, which was our previous subscription membership. So we had already tested that there was, let's say, a commercial appetite, not just that people had replied, to a survey saying, yay, I want it, because that's so easy to do. Of course, we all know that. But we reached kind of a critical mass of members where we decided as a business, like, cool, this can work. This is going to be, this is the start of the step towards our long-term strategy of building this community platform. And so, taking it back to MVP, or we use the terminology minimum viable experiment, I think for everyone, if you're non-technical and if you don't have external funding, this is a big undertaking, right? We're talking about December when we started, and we're going to be launching MVP in a few weeks, but there's a long roadmap after that as well. So I would say, use an out-of-the-box system if there is one, and if it will adequately test the value that you want to offer, to validate before you make what is a really massive investment. So I'm going to just throw you a question from Cozy, if you don't mind. So Cozy is tuned in, and Cozy, let us know where you are as well in the world. How would you prototype financial services, accounting, or tax tech? I guess I started answering this with the MVE, but do you want to add anything, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would try to bucket this into, a category of mass used solutions. So I think accounting is a great example, and tax tech is a great example where there's a million solutions out there. So I think, there's a great example where there's clearly a significant market, so large market opportunity, but there are most likely some, dominant players out there, big name brands, who have probably cornered certain aspects of the market. So I think one of the things that I would at least be doing, is trying to figure out, one is to understand that market space. Who are the major players? Where do they dominate, and why do they dominate? And then secondly, what problem you're trying to solve that maybe these others don't solve. Maybe it's a country-specific problem that some of these, offerings don't play very well in. Maybe it's a, certain, maybe small business, problem that you're trying to solve, or some government, public. So must be some unique problem that you're trying to solve. So that's the thing that I would try to really focus on. and make sure that when doing this due diligence from a competitor perspective, that you're clear, that these competitors don't currently solve it today. And then I would look at, trying to find maybe 10 potential customers. And I would work with, either a UX person or even just get a, boxes and lines prototyping tool. There's, a great add-in in PowerPoint of all things, that provides all of the bootstrap, icons. So you could very easily prototype, I'm saying no code prototype, your own end-to-end offering, and then sit with 10 potential customers and use the opportunity to walk through what the problem is and how you think you're solving the problem. And it's that level, I think, of discussion that helps you get better at articulating the problem, articulating the solution, and then evolving and refining. And only once you've evolved and refined, and clearly, there's buy-in from these potential customers, would I then maybe look at, evolving the prototype into something that is maybe clickable, and then, giving it to them, but still no code. And once you've recorded maybe some of those interactions, maybe it's then the time to start looking at building. But that's a thing that I've seen, happen, very common with startups is, to move directly into building and not do some of this validation. But it is profound, the feedback that you would get, from these potential customers to either validate or invalidate some of your thinking. Hope that helps.
That's an amazing answer, Mark. And I think, just to add one thing you said at the start, this month,
Well, I think we might have lost Lauren there. So maybe let's just give her a couple of minutes just to reconnect. So it looks like Lauren's having some connectivity issues. So says she's trying to rejoin. So maybe in the meantime, I can just continue talking through some of the experience. So maybe it looks like we got Lauren back. Hey, Lauren, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me again?
We can. Yeah, that's great.
Wouldn't be a tech interview if we didn't get thrown off the tech, would it? Did you jump into Lavender's question, or should we head there next?
I'm not seeing the questions, but I may have just different privileges.
Perfect. So let's jump into this one. Thank you, Lavender. So saying, what's the advice for navigating partnerships when thinking of launching a tech product? Also, how best do you build a great team? Do you want to take the first question? I can take the second if you like.
Sure. Well, I think once again, having a good tech founder, I think is key, especially on the technology side, so that you've got someone to help you navigate partnering with the right development team. I think for us, we experienced a bit of a challenge where the war in Ukraine had a ripple effect on our initial plans. So one of the many curveballs that we got thrown over the last year or so, and the war in Ukraine, the ripple effect was most of the online consulting websites like Upwork pretty much shut down any work that was happening in Russia. So what happened then is all the development contracts that were with Russian companies then started a move outside of Russia, Romania, Moldova, and so on. So what happened to us was the original team that we were planning to work with got reprioritized in terms of who they were going to work with, because now large corporates with big budgets started throwing money at the problem. And of course, the small startups could not compete. So that for us was a very interesting experience, which one would never have even imagined would have happened. And there was, a great example of, well, the partnership that you thought you had now isn't, working out to be the way that you need it to work. So how do you kind of, work around that? And that then, became a bit of an concerted effort to, start reaching out to other teams that are out there, and then going through, effectively the due diligence all over again to try to find, new development teams, the right tech stack, the right skills, the right price, the right availability, and so on. So I think we've lost Lauren again. You back? So, hey, Lauren. So I've answered the first part of the question. If you want to tackle the second part.
Yeah, perfect. Great. So how do you build a great team? For anyone who wasn't on CEO Diaries last week, I mean, at Future Females, we have an amazing team. But we've also had a lot of challenges with team changes all the way through the launch. So I guess I can speak to both. But if I think about, the early days of Future Females, when Serena and I were hiring, we always followed, the adage, hire for attitude over aptitude. And for a business like ours, and from reading the chat, most of yours, we always looked for purpose and values aligned team members. In the early days of a startup as well, the roles are really not defined in the way that they are in corporate. The boundaries, we always joke, but it's a reality. They're very, very blurry, right? Our head of programs was our event manager, was our community manager. She was building websites the night before our launch back in the day. So I think it's important to look for, people who are adaptable, who are comfortable operating in ambiguity, which sounds like one of those fluffy things you throw onto the job description, but I've learned is actually one of the most important things. Someone who doesn't necessarily need to know what they're going to be doing in a month and thrives off that change. So that would be my recommendation. For us as well, the values alignment is something we always interview for. Future Females operates by 5 key values, and we ask a question about each of them in the first interview with a team member. So I would say that those 2 things for us has come together to produce some of our most successful team members. Our first ever paid employee is now our director of marketing. So she's been with us since the start and has grown her own team underneath. I know a lot of people advise your first hire to be a virtual assistant, and I agree that outsourcing your administrative and repeated tasks, particularly when you're the founder and you need to focus more on the strategic and creative and sales oriented, makes sense. But we chose to bring that VA type person in-house. So, started as our virtual assistant / marketing assistant and grew from there. So yeah, I guess that would be my advice. Values hiring, comfortable with ambiguity, and taking, a medium to long-term view of that hire so someone can grow with you. Mark, considering some of our reception issues, but also just looking at the questions, I'm just going to do a shout out now to anyone who has an outstanding question. Please add it to any of your channels. We're moderating them all. It could be about launching your own tech platform, working with developers or UX designers, proof of concept, MVP, minimum viable product, any of those things we're here to answer for you. Perhaps while we give people a second, I have a final question for you. Again, from personal curiosity, what would you say has been your toughest decision over the last 9 months in terms of, I guess, the launch and build quite broadly?
Toughest decision. Well, I'm not sure if it's toughest decision, but one of the toughest to deal with, I think, was, finding the right user experience and user interface people, and then also finding the right developers. So, as you mentioned, I think it was a bummer that, the person we were working with previously, who I had a relationship with and, had a good flow, we mind melded well, wasn't able to continue. So then it was, well, cool, what's the plan B? And I think we've worked with now 5 different user experience, user interface people. That on its own was pretty painful. And I think, a big part of the pain is the amount of work that went into just finding people is surprisingly insane. And the same with developers. The amount of companies that I reached out to, spoke to, met with, reviewed developers' resumes, chatted with developers is like off the charts crazy. And I feel like that doing that kind of work is an important part of making sure that you're bringing the right people onto the team, because it's hard, I think, especially with developers, once you start, it's kind of hard to undo, working with folks. On the, user experience, user interface front, I think it's easier to kind of, move from one person to the other. But the problem is each time there's this ramp up, and that is just very expensive. And then there's also just, different understanding. Some come from more of a graphic design background. Some come from a pure, web design background. And there are fundamental differences between, a graphic designer versus a web designer. And being able to kind of transition between the two don't necessarily always work very well. So it's once again, it's like finding the right person that, you can kind of mind meld with, solve the right problems and be flexible, kind of like Lauren said, adaptable, flexible, agile, to kind of think broader than just this specific problem, but also to think about not reinventing the wheel, how others have solved the same problem, because it's just a user interface and there's at least 10 ways to solve the same problem. So, why try to come up with a new or different way when we could just copy and, maybe even improve or tweak or combine a couple of different approaches into one. So, I think that's definitely been, one of the hardest, at least for me.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate that. I think it's also, though, a testament to your temperament, which I would say is very important to have alongside you during a launch, in that you kind of expect these changes to come, and it's never fun when they do, but you just need to hold course and hold to the plan and re-onboard as quickly as possible.
Yeah, not lose sight of the big picture. But yeah, so that I think is another great takeaway. I think that we chatted about even recently is sequencing. I think a lot of startups, have this mentality of, I need to release everything for my MVP. Well, it turns out you actually don't have to. There are some things that would be important to release as part of the MVP, but some things that you can wait until you actually have customers. So I think, coming up with a roadmap, that is all about sequencing in mind, I think is also a very important, way to kind of just think about building something. And that, isn't just about building software, but it's also all of the marketing related activities and, whether it's sales and business development and so on, that goes along with that is, not everything has to happen at the same time. And I think for most humans, that's a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around because, we want to be perfect and we want to, have everything. And it's hard to kind of think through, what do I need now versus what I need in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months and so on.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're probably speaking to me because I am probably the tension on the other side of that, right? So I'm like, no, it has to be the best. It has to be this, has to be unique and different and the identity of Future Females. And I think that's probably in a way why we work well together because we have that beautiful balance and tension. But something that I've learned, to your point as well, is the co-creation with your customers is so valuable because then your customers feel part of what you're creating. And actually, if you put something perfect and glossy out there, then you don't have that opportunity for the co-creation. So, I mean, most of you would know because you're tuned in. And if you're not on the wait list, do jump on. The link is in the caption on every single platform that we're live on right now. But we are inviting people from the wait list when we open the doors to jump in first and be what we're calling our founding members, which we're seeing as like an extension of our team. People who are going to go through and give us feedback, who when we have a decision to make, whether it's strategic or feature or which course would you like next or which group should we open next, our founding members are going to be the ones who say, this is what we need and this is what we're seeing in our local ecosystem. So I'm excited that we actually have the space between launch and perfect to have that opportunity. And it's also, speaking earlier about things founders shy away from, we often shy away from building with our customer because also we want to put the best product in their hands. But for anyone who might be in that mindset, and I speak to it because I have been in previous businesses, the value of building alongside customers is just so, so great. And it removes the ego. And it also, in a way, removes some of the risk because you're literally building for the person who's buying.
Totally agree.
Cool. I'm going to award our prize in just a minute. So just a quick reminder, if anyone wasn't on at the start, we are going to pick someone who has interacted or asked questions or shared their own experiences, and there's been many of you, to win an item of Future Females merch. So I'm going to pick your name in a couple of minutes when we get towards wrapping up, and you can choose any item of Future Females merch. You can look at the shop on Instagram to take your pick, and then we'll send it right out to you. But before I do that, I think let's take one more. And I'm going to go for Carrie's, only because Lavender, we did answer your previous question. And I think this is a really interesting one. In partnership, which works better? Offering co-founders a monthly compensation or shareholding? Getting around compensations before anything monetizes to avoid going under before you start? Yeah. So this is a really good question, and I like it because it gets right into the nitty-gritty. And our Future Females journey has been interesting because on day one, it was 4 of us. Then soon after that, Mark went and started his other tech business. Soon after that, Serena also left for a period of a year, and the 4th person actually never really engaged after day one. So it's been a really interesting journey of people coming and going and considering remuneration. I think I can speak to a couple of things here. Firstly, if you're bringing in a co-founder at the start, then you both have skin in the game. That you would expect that you would both put money in, but also risk, right? If you're full-time on something that is unproven, then there's a lot of risk that you're both taking, and an opportunity cost too. So I think that's where the shareholding comes in. Something that we did from day one that I would suggest to everyone is having a vesting schedule. So even as co-founders, and at that point, so myself and Serena were the only ones with equity, we put ourselves both on vesting schedules. And what that means is we each had 40%, and we decided that we would earn 10% each per year over 4 years, so that if one of us left, there wasn't an awkward conversation about shareholding. It was just like, okay, cool. You're leaving at this point in time, therefore you've vested this much, and this much goes back into the pot or is redistributed. So I guess to answer your question directly, Carrie, I didn't know Serena actually on day one when we made that decision, which is why we put that extra legal checkpoint in. And it's something that I would always recommend. Mark coming back as a shareholder. We also have other shareholders now on the team. We all operate on this 4-year vesting schedule, so that if anything changes, no matter what the level of that change, the business is safe and can have someone else step in. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Okay, I'm gonna award our prize, if that's okay with you, Mark.
Sounds good.
Cool. Alrighty. So now the questions are flying in. So if you have asked something we haven't answered, we'll pop onto the social channel and come back to you directly. But I am going to award to, I'm gonna pop up on the screen, Leo Gold Projects, who has made quite a few comments and has been with us since the start of what's now a 50-minute conversation. So I'm glad you guys have been getting the value from it. And this comment in particular, yes, the right attitude brings altitude, obviously in addition to when we were discussing recruiting team members and fit as you're working towards building and launching. So thank you for that. Please DM us on Facebook is fine, your email address, and we'll send you out the options. You can pick your favorite piece of merch and we'll go from there. Okay, great. Then I'm just going to say a big thank you firstly to you, Mark, for jumping on. I know it's interesting always to manage
Thanks time for the opportunity.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And for everyone who's tuned in and has been commenting, thank you. Really appreciate it as well. Hope you've gotten value. I always enjoy these discussions. Our next CEO Diaries is back at the usual time, which is 12 p.m. GMT +2. And it's going to be actually with our content creator. Her name is Leah. She manages our Instagram and Facebook. And we're going to be speaking specifically about organic content and organic, basically meaning free, lead generation for your product launches. So I see a couple of people have been asking about, limited budgets. So tune in for that session because we will talk about acquisition without needing a budget to put into it. Amazing. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you. See you guys. Bye.